Imagine this. A woman wakes up before the sun does. No one sees her. No one applauds her. There's no crowd, no ribbon to cut, no medal waiting on the other side of her effort, just a quiet room, a rising heartbeat, and a decision she has made 1,000 times before. Get up, keep going, don't stop. She doesn't move because someone is cheering her on. She moves because life has given her two choices, fold or rise, and she's already tested the first one. It didn't work, and the extraordinary thing, this woman is everywhere. She could be the barista handing you your morning coffee. She could be the teacher who walks into a classroom after wiping her tears in the parking lot. She could be the CEO who built her empire from nothing but grit and insomnia. She could be the girl you scroll past online, never knowing she fought through hell to stand where she is. Or she could be you. There are women in this world who didn't become strong because someone guided them, supported them, or held their hand. They became strong because no one did. They learned to heal without comfort. They learned to fight without backup. They learned to believe without evidence. And if you look closely, you'll see them. Not because they shout, but because they glow, quietly, powerfully, with a strength that can't be borrowed or given. Tonight, we're unraveling the 7 unmistakable signs of women who learn to be strong completely on their own. Not to romanticize struggle, not to glorify hardship, but to recognize the courage it takes to build yourself from scratch. Because the world sees the finished woman, but we are here to talk about the process, the nights, the battles, the choices, and the moment she realized, no one is coming, so I will become the one who saves me. Are you ready? Let's dive in. Strength built in silence is one of the most misunderstood forces on the planet. When people think of transformation, they imagine noise. They imagine the dramatic montage, the big speech, the before and after reveal. But real transformation, especially for a woman learning to be strong entirely on her own, doesn't look like that. It happens quietly, almost invisibly, in moments too small for anyone else to notice. There is no spotlight, no soundtrack swelling in the background. There's just a woman facing herself in real time, making decisions she never asked to make, and realizing the life she wants will only arrive if she keeps going. Silent strength begins in the ordinary. It begins while she's brushing her teeth after a night spent crying, and no one in the world sees her swollen eyes. It begins when she answers an email she doesn't want to answer, or pays a bill she had to stretch herself thin to afford. It starts when she shows up to work, school, or responsibility even though every fiber of her body begs her to stay in bed. There is no applause for these choices, and yet these are the exact moments that forge resilience. The world applauds outcomes. Strength is built in inputs, the repeated tiny acts of not giving up. There is a point in every strong woman's journey when she realizes that she is changing and nobody else knows it. She could be sitting at a kitchen table, or waiting at a red light, or standing in a grocery store line when it hits her. She is no longer the same person she was a year ago, or even a month ago. Something has shifted. She handles things differently. She no longer reacts the way she used to. She doesn't unravel as easily. The things that once broke her now barely shake her, but she doesn't announce it. Why? Because strength taught her something else she has nothing to prove. When a woman learns to be strong on her own, she also learns the power of keeping her battles private. You will not find her broadcasting her pain for sympathy or recognition. She does not need people to validate her struggle. She has learned that validation is temporary, and she cannot afford to rely on it. So instead of narrating her hardship, she channels her energy into surviving it. She works in silence. She grows in silence. She rebuilds in silence. And here is the beautiful irony. Silence is where identity takes shape. In silence, she learns who she really is, without input, without direction, without permission. She begins to understand her own patterns, her triggers, her strengths, her flaws. She sees which relationships drain her and which ones actually contribute something meaningful. She identifies the pieces of herself she wants to keep and the pieces she needs to let go. And without anyone noticing, she begins to redesign her life from within. Quiet transformation doesn't feel powerful at first. In fact, it often feels like nothing is happening. It feels like walking through thick fog. Every step small, slow, uncertain. Other people might assume she's stagnant because they can't see what's shifting beneath the surface. But that is the thing about true internal growth. People only see the results after they've already taken shape. Long before anyone notices her confidence, she has fought for it. Before anyone compliments her clarity, she has questioned everything she believed. Before anyone says she looks stronger, she has survived nights wondering if she could keep going. And then one day, the fog clears. She wakes up and realizes that something buried inside her has hardened, not into coldness, but into unshakable foundation. The uncertainty she used to drown in has turned to clarity. The fear that once dictated her steps has gotten quieter. She finds herself handling things that used to overwhelm her, and does it almost effortlessly. She carries the same load that once crushed her, except now she does it with better posture. Without even noticing when it happened, she has become the kind of woman she once admired from a distance. People eventually start to comment on the change. They notice her voice carries more conviction. They notice she doesn't say yes as quickly. They notice she walks differently, not arrogantly but with intention. They wonder what happened. Some assume she finally got lucky, or someone came into her life to lift her up. They see the outcome but miss the story. They do not see the moments she patched herself together with nothing but grit. They do not see the days she navigated storms alone. They do not see the internal arguments she won in order to stand tall. The quiet transformation is never about one dramatic moment. It is a collection of thousands of unseen choices layered on top of one another, choosing courage when fear is louder, choosing persistence when quitting seems rational, choosing hope when disappointment has become familiar. It is realizing that even if no one else shows up for her, she can show up for herself. It is learning that she does not need to wait to be saved. She can do the saving. And the most powerful part? She emerges from this silent rebuilding not with bitterness but with depth. She understands pain, but she is not defined by it. She knows what it takes to survive alone, but she also knows that strength gives her the freedom to choose who she allows into her life, not out of need but preference. Her quiet transformation has given her something that cannot be taken away, the knowledge that her strength is self-made, self-earned, and self-owned. There is nothing louder than a woman who has rebuilt herself quietly. She doesn't need to tell you she's strong. You'll see it when she walks into a room. There comes a moment in every woman's life when she realizes she is standing by herself. Not because she prefers it, not because she chose it out of convenience, but because life rearranged itself in a way that left her with two options: collapse under the weight of solitude, or learn to carry it with steadiness and dignity. And the surprising part is not that she survives, it's that she learns to thrive. Standing alone isn't a dramatic declaration. It rarely begins with a fierce, empowering speech. More often, it begins quietly, almost without her noticing. One day she looks around and realizes the people she leaned on aren't there anymore. Maybe they walked away. Maybe life pulled them elsewhere. Maybe she outgrew them without even realizing it was happening. Whatever the reason, she finds herself in a space she never expected, responsible for her own emotional footing. At first, being alone can feel like being stranded, like she has been dropped into a wilderness without a compass. The silence feels too loud, the hours too long, and the weight of her own thoughts almost unbearable. This is the stage most people never talk about. The early days of solitude are not poetic. They are filled with discomfort, fear, and second-guessing. She might wonder if she drove people away, or if something is wrong with her, or if she is fundamentally unlovable. Loneliness whispers ugly things in her ear. It tries to convince her that being alone is a punishment. But thing shifts when she decides not to run from that feeling. Instead of filling the silence with distractions, noise, people, obligations, she sits with it. She stays. And in that stillness, she discovers something important. Being alone and being lonely are not the same thing. Loneliness is the ache for connection. Alone is simply a state of being. They inhabit the same room, but they don't speak the same language. Eventually, she starts to see the difference. She begins to feel the power that comes from standing on her own feet without fearing she'll fall. She realizes she doesn't need someone else's voice to drown out her own thoughts. She doesn't need constant company to prove her value. She may miss certain people or certain comforts, but she no longer believes her worth depends on being chosen, supported, or accompanied. There is a freedom that comes with learning you can stand alone. An expansive, liberating certainty. If you lose everything tomorrow, your job, your relationships, your routine, you will still have yourself, and you trust that she is enough. As she grows stronger in her solitude, something profound unfolds. She begins to hear her own voice more clearly. Without competing opinions or external pressure, she starts making decisions based on what she truly wants, not what someone else expects of her. She discovers her preferences, her priorities, her boundaries. She recognizes the difference between people she needs and people she simply wants in her life. And because she no longer fears being alone, she doesn't cling to relationships that drain her or environments that shrink her. This is where strength shows up, not as survival, but as choice. She stops tolerating half-hearted love, toxic friendships, or situations that force her to abandon herself. She walks away, not because she doesn't care, but because she finally cares about herself just as much. And when you are capable of standing alone, you develop the courage to demand more, from others and from life. People around her start to notice the shift. They may misinterpret it at first. They might mistake her independence for distance, her boundaries for coldness, her peace for indifference. But those who take a deeper look will see something else. A woman who no longer lives at the mercy of external support. A woman who stands grounded, rooted in who she has become. There is a quiet majesty in watching a woman embrace herself fully. She laughs more freely because she's not performing for anyone. She takes risks she once avoided because failure no longer threatens her identity. She enjoys her own company, reading in silence, walking alone, sitting in a cafe with her thoughts as her only companion. These are not acts of isolation, they are celebrations of self-trust. And one day she realizes something remarkable. The loneliness she feared has transformed into solitude she cherishes. Being alone now feels like a privilege, not a punishment. It is space to heal, space to grow. Space to think clearly and breathe deeply. It is the foundation on which her future is now being built. Then something even more unexpected happens. She starts connecting with others not from desperation or need, but from abundance. She chooses relationships rather than relying on them. She gives without losing herself. She loves without sacrificing her identity. She supports others without collapsing under the weight of responsibility. Because she knows, truly knows, that if everyone else disappears again, she will still be okay. Standing alone doesn't make her invulnerable. It makes her grounded. It doesn't make her immune to heartbreak or disappointment. It makes her capable of enduring both without falling apart. It doesn't make her stop wanting connection. It makes her more selective about where she places her heart. The world often trains women to fear solitude. But the strongest ones learn it is not a void, it is a forge. It is where they learn to live with themselves, trust themselves, and love themselves without terms or conditions. A woman who has mastered the art of standing alone is not untouchable. She is unshakable. And that is why she never truly feels lonely again. There comes a turning point in a woman's life when she realizes her energy, her time, and her peace are not limitless. Maybe she spent years overgiving, stretching herself to cover the needs of everyone around her. Maybe she said yes when she meant no, out of fear of disappointing people or being judged. Maybe she tolerated disrespect because she wanted to be accepted, loved, or understood. At some point, though, something inside her breaks. Not in a destructive way, but in a liberating one. She wakes up and understands that boundaries are not selfish walls meant to shut others out. They are sacred doors meant to protect the space where she grows. Mastery of boundaries doesn't happen overnight. It's learned slowly, often through pain. Pain becomes the teacher when someone takes advantage of her kindness, when a friend betrays her trust, when a relationship chips away at her identity, or when saying yes to the world means saying no to herself again and again. Eventually, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. She looks in the mirror and sees exhaustion where joy used to be. She hears herself apologizing for wanting basic respect. She notices that the people who ask the most of her often give the least in return. And one day, she decides that something has to change. She realizes she no longer has the luxury of being limitless. The first boundary is often the hardest. It might be a small word, no, but it feels like lifting a mountain. Saying no when she has always said yes can feel rude, unnatural, or dangerous. She braces herself for backlash because she knows the people who benefited from her lack of boundaries will not applaud her new ones. Some will be confused, some will be offended. A few might walk away entirely. And while the loss stings at first, it all so reveals a truth she had forgotten. The right people don't need her to break herself to keep them. As she grows more comfortable protecting her time and energy, she starts to see boundaries differently. They stop feeling like lines drawn against others and start feeling like promises made to herself. A promise that she will not allow anyone, including herself, to diminish her worth. A promise that she will no longer carry emotional loads that do not belong to her. A promise that she will honor her needs even when it's inconvenient for others. The surprising part is how immediately her life begins to shift. Saying no creates space for rest, for clarity, for her own voice to finally be heard. She begins to differentiate between obligations and choices. She stops volunteering for chaos. She refuses to participate in drama. She exits conversations that go nowhere. She declines invitations that drain her spirit. Instead of scrambling to prove her value, she chooses environments that recognize it without being asked. Boundaries also change how she approaches relationships. She no longer tolerates inconsistency or emotional breadcrumbs. She stops answering calls that leave her anxious and stops giving time to people who take and never give. She learns to identify manipulation, not just in others but in herself, when she tries to justify mistreatment. She sees clearly the difference between love and dependency, between support and control, between loyalty and self-sacrifice. And because she knows what she will not accept, she becomes stronger at recognizing what she truly deserves. There's another layer to this mastery, learning to set boundaries without guilt. At first, guilt feels automatic. She worries people will think she's changed, and for once, they're right, she has. She worries she'll be labeled harsh, cold, or ungrateful, but the deeper she goes, the more she understands guilt is just an old reflex from a life lived pleasing others. It fades as she realizes boundaries do not hurt healthy relationships, they strengthen them. With boundaries in place, her relationships become more balanced. Conversations shift from one-sided to mutual. She starts forming connections with people who respect her limits instead of pushing past them. She attracts those who value emotional honesty and pushes away those who relied on her silence. Her world doesn't get smaller, rather it becomes clearer. Even her relationship with herself transforms. She no longer abandons her needs to chase harmony. She practices self-compassion, not self-neglect. When she says yes now, it is intentional. When she stays present, it is wholehearted. Her yes means more because it is no longer automatic. Boundaries also fuel her growth. Without the constant drain of carrying others' expectations, she has room to pursue her own aspirations. Dreams she once postponed become reachable. She experiments, learns, stretches, and evolves, no longer interrupted by demands that once felt non-negotiable. Her energy becomes her own currency, and she finally invests it where it matters most. And perhaps the greatest gift of all is this: boundaries teach her that she is allowed to choose herself. She is allowed to walk away from what harms her. She is allowed to disappoint others if it means she no longer disappoints herself. She is allowed to exist without shrinking to fit someone else's comfort. Some may call it selfish. She knows better. Self-respect often looks like rebellion to those who benefited from her lack of it. Owning her boundaries is not about pushing the world away. It's about letting herself fully enter her own life. She no longer fears that protecting her peace will cost her relationships because she finally understands that the relationships worth keeping do not require her to be smaller than she is. Mastery of boundaries becomes more than a skill. It becomes a way of living, a life where she chooses herself without apology, a life where she refuses to negotiate her worth, a life where the circle around her may be smaller, but it is genuine, steady, and strong, and in that protected space, she grows into the woman she was always meant to be. Strength built from scars doesn't look polished or perfect. It doesn't arrive wrapped in comfort or decorated with praise. It is raw, unfiltered, and painfully earned. Women who learned to be strong on their own didn't grow from fairy tale endings or picture-perfect victories. They grew because life forked them to face experiences they never signed up for, losses they didn't deserve, disappointments they couldn't predict, betrayals that cut deeper than they understood at the time. Their strength isn't a pretty story, it's a survival record. From the outside, people often romanticize resilience as if it's a gift some are simply born with. But a woman who has learned to be strong from scar tissue knows better. She knows resilience is not inherited, it is built. It is built from moments she thought she would not survive but did anyway. It is built from nights she cried herself empty and mornings when she woke up with nothing left but sheer will. It is built from every time life knocked her flat and she got back up, not because she felt ready, but because staying down was not an option. Her journey often begins with pain she didn't know how to process. Maybe it was heartbreak, the kind that leaves invisible fractures running through her sense of self. Maybe it was betrayal, watching someone she trusted turn into a stranger. Maybe it was failure, public, humiliating, or quiet and private, but crushing all the same. Or maybe it was a lifetime of small hurts that accumulated like pebbles until the weight became a boulder she had no choice but to push uphill. The pain leaves marks. It leaves scars. And scars, contrary to what people assume, don't make you weaker. They make you aware of what you survived. At first, resilience doesn't feel like strength. It feels like enduring. It feels like waking up still hurting but going through the motions anyway. It feels like putting one foot in front of the other when your spirit is dragging behind. Pain pushes her into the arena long before she thinks she's ready to fight. Her resilience grows in the middle of chaos, while she's holding herself together with trembling hands, wishing someone would step in and fix it for her, and slowly realizing no one is coming. This realization is painful but powerful. When she understands she is on her own, something inside her shifts. That shift is where resilience begins. She learns she cannot control what happens to her, but she can control how she responds. She recognizes that strength isn't the absence of fear, weakness, or doubt. Strength is facing all three and moving anyway. Over time, the pain transforms from something that wounds to something that teaches. It teaches her what she can survive. It teaches her what and who is worth her energy. It teaches her to pay attention to patterns, not promises. It teaches her to trust actions, not words. It teaches her to stop giving access to people who treat her like an afterthought. Every scar becomes a lesson written into her skin. Lessons that fairy tales never teach. Fairy tales promise rescue. Reality teaches self-rescue. Fairy tales offer heroes. Reality teaches her to become her own. With each wound she heals, she becomes more frighteningly clear about who she is. She discovers a strength she never would have developed if life had gone easy. She learns to stop romanticizing potential and start honoring reality. Her standards rise, not because she's bitter, but because she knows her worth in a way she never knew before the pain forced her to question it. What once destroyed her now fuels her. The heartbreak she survived makes her wiser in love. The disappointments she endured teach her patience and discernment. The betrayals sharpen her instincts. Her failures become proof that she tried, learned, and came back stronger. Most importantly, the pain teaches her she can rely on herself. Resilience built from scars also changes how she sees others. She becomes more compassionate, not less. Because she knows suffering firsthand, she recognizes it quietly in others. She understands pain hides behind smiles, exhaustion hides behind humor, and fear hides behind silence. Her empathy deepens, not because she is soft, but because she remembers how it felt when no one noticed her battles. But she also becomes more selective. She won't save people who refuse to save themselves. She knows the difference between supporting someone and carrying them. Her boundaries sharpen, not out of coldness, but self-preservation. She has already spent too many nights rebuilding pieces of herself that others carelessly broke. She is done being careless with her own heart. The beautiful irony of resilience built from scars is that it rarely shows on the surface. The woman who has survived the most often looks the calmest. People mistake her steadiness for ease, unaware that her stillness was forged through storms. Her silence isn't emptiness, it's wisdom earned in battle. Her strength isn't loud because it no longer needs to prove anything. She doesn't need to announce her pain or impress anyone with her survival story. She wears her strength like armor beneath her skin, light, fitted, and invisible unless you know where to look. One day she realizes she is no longer just surviving, she's thriving. The life that once weighed her down becomes a landscape she can navigate with confidence. The storms she feared become challenges she can weather. The obstacles that once overwhelmed her become stepping stones beneath her feet. The woman she has become is not the same woman she was before pain entered her life, and she is grateful for that evolution, even if she would never wish for the suffering that forged it. Fairy tales tell stories of happy endings wrapped neatly with a bow. Resilient women know life doesn't work that way. Their story doesn't end when they overcome one hardship. It continues, and so does their growth. They are their own heroes, forged from fire, shaped by experience, strengthened by scars, and the scars don't make them damaged. They make them undeniable. Leadership, for a woman who learned strength alone, rarely arrives with a nameplate, a corner office, or applause. It begins long before anyone recognizes her impact, and often long before she sees it in herself. She steps into leadership not by chasing influence but by surviving her own life and emerging with clarity, courage, and a presence that others instinctively turn toward. This kind of leadership isn't taught, it's lived. She doesn't wait for permission, she doesn't wait for someone to tap her on the shoulder and say, "You're chosen." Life forces her into situations where she becomes the decision maker, the stabilizer, the voice of reason, and the backbone others lean on, whether she wants the role or not. She learns that when chaos erupts, someone has to remain calm, and more often than not, that someone is her. Her leadership begins in the small moments, when everyone else panics and she takes a breath, when others crumble and she holds steady, when decisions feel terrifying and she makes them anyway. She learns to guide herself through uncertainty, and in doing so, she becomes someone others naturally follow. It isn't a speech that makes her a leader, it's the way she navigates storms without losing herself. One of the most defining aspects of her quiet leadership is that she earns influence instead of requesting it. People notice her not because she demands attention, but because she embodies strength in a world where many only talk about it. Her consistency makes her trustworthy. Her resilience makes her inspirational. Her ability to keep moving forward makes her unforgettable. People watch the way she handles adversity and think, if she can get through that, maybe I can too. She leads through. Off example. Not the curated, filtered version people display online, but the lived through the fire kind. She has learned to show up for herself, and that alone inspires others to show up for themselves. Without ever giving a lecture, she teaches by modeling integrity, showing up on the days she doesn't feel like it, speaking honestly when silence would be easier, resisting the urge to please everyone, and choosing purpose over approval. Ironically, many women like her spent early years minimizing themselves. They played small to avoid conflict or judgment. They stayed quiet to avoid being seen as too much. Yet life has a way of drawing leaders out of hiding. When she finally stops shrinking to fit someone else's comfort, her presence expands naturally. People feel it, they respect it. Not everyone likes it, but leadership is not a popularity contest. Another quality that defines her leadership is that she understands the weight of responsibility. She knows what it costs to carry burdens alone, so she refuses to put unnecessary weight on others. She doesn't manipulate or dominate. She doesn't play power games. She leads with empathy, not ego. Because she knows how it feels to be dismissed, she listens. Because she knows how it feels to be overlooked, she sees people others ignore. And because she knows how it feels to carry more than she should, she steps in to lighten the load. Not to control, but to support. This balance, strength paired with compassion, is what sets her apart. She can walk into a room and sense the atmosphere before a word is spoken. She notices who's struggling, who's pretending, who's drowning quietly. Her leadership doesn't announce itself with authority, it reveals itself through intuition, presence, and understanding. She also has a gift for drawing boundaries that create clarity for others. Where people's expectations are scattered, she brings focus. Where conversations drift into drama or confusion, she redirects. Where indecision paralyzes, she makes a choice. People learn quickly that she is not someone who wastes time or energy on what doesn't matter, and because she has learned to be her own leader, people instinctively trust her guidance. But perhaps the most powerful part of her leadership is that she is not motivated by recognition. She doesn't need credit. She doesn't need a title to validate her impact. She leads because it is who she has become. Titles can be handed out, leadership is earned breath by breath, decision by decision. Still, that lack of external validation doesn't mean her leadership goes unnoticed forever. Eventually, her influence becomes too visible to ignore. People seek her advice not because she claims expertise, but because her wisdom was shaped by living, not theorizing. Friends turn to her when life gets messy. Co-workers look to her when direction is unclear. Family members rely on her judgment when stakes are high. Without trying, she becomes the steady ground others stand on. And here is the most astonishing part. Even when she becomes the person everyone counts on, she never forgets what it felt like to stand alone. That memory keeps her humble. It keeps her from judging others. It reminds her that strength is not a privilege, but a responsibility. Her leadership becomes a gift she carries forward, not with arrogance, but with quiet certainty. She knows she earned every piece of the woman she has become. She earned her voice, her clarity, her strength. She earned her ability to guide others because she first learned to guide herself. Leadership without the title is the purest form because it can't be faked. It doesn't vanish when the room changes or the audience disappears. It doesn't depend on job roles or social status. It is who she is when no one is watching. And that authenticity is why people trust her when they are. A true leader does not need a pedestal. She becomes the light others gravitate towards simply by refusing to dim her own. Strength built alone is not loud, flashy, or glamorous. It's forged in the unlit corners of life where no one is watching and no one is clapping. The women who learn to be strong on their own do so because they had no choice at first. But somewhere along the journey, it stopped being about survival and became about identity. They learned to fight, to rise, to speak, to stand alone, to protect their hearts, to lead without titles, and to grow from every bruise into someone unrecognizable from who they once were. These women don't become strong for applause. They become strong because they finally understand their worth, because they chose rebuilding instead of breaking, because they refused to let the world decide who they could or could not be. And here's what matters most. Their story isn't just theirs. Every woman watching, hearing, or reading this right now has a moment, maybe today, maybe tomorrow, when she stands at a crossroads. One path tells her to wait for someone to fix it, to shrink, to silence herself, to settle. The other path tells her to rise, to walk forward even with shaking legs, to carve out her own way, and to claim her life back inch by inch. Choose the second path, not because it's easy, but because everything you want, peace, power, clarity, respect, self-love, lives on the other side of that choice. You don't need permission to start. You don't need approval to grow. You don't need someone else to save you. You are capable of becoming the woman you are searching for. And if you have already become her, if you've already stood alone, set boundaries, healed from scars, led with quiet power, then hear this clearly. Your strength is not a burden. It is a blueprint. It shows others what is possible. The world does not change when a woman is carried. It changes when she learns she can carry herself. So stand tall, own your story, honor your scars, lead from wherever you are, because a woman who learns to be strong alone doesn't just survive, she becomes unstoppable.